Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to the Accursed, and the continuation of our series of putting Curseborne in the world of various authors' fiction, or putting their fiction in the world of Curseborne. I found the exercise with the Stephen King books quite fun. I recently made two videos based around several Stephen King works pulled randomly off my shelves to see which ones would work well within a Curseborne framework, and a lot of them did. I make no bones about the fact that Stephen King's work very much influenced my writing for Curseborne and many of the ideas I have put to paper. So I thought I would range a little further afield, still into the realm of horror, though one could argue of a more pulpy nature, and certainly a more British sense. This being the works of James Herbert. Now, if you happen to be not British, you may not know who James Herbert is. James Herbert, through the 1970s and 80s, and hell, he was writing all the way up until the 2010s, so far as I know, was the British horror author. Oh, there were certainly others. But if you wanted to pick up a quick paperback novel that had death, gore, sex, and a pretty short page count, James Herbert was a good author to go for. There was a B-movie quality to a lot of his work, and indeed, while I greatly enjoy reading James Herbert novels, I can absolutely see the Garth Marenghi nature of some of his work. And I can also see him repeating certain themes in various books. So he's an interesting one to examine. Certainly his book very rarely deals with the uncanny in the same way as Stephen King. You know, this isn't going to be quite so subtle. Not all Stephen King's work is subtle, but I've recently been watching Welcome to Derry just to stick with King for a while, and that whole idea of the town being evil, the people in the town being against you or being suspicious or not believing a word you say, that has a level of paranoia which James Herbert very rarely delves into. James Herbert is more involved with visceral horror, something that is very much in your face and terrifying, something quite existential rather than creeping. And I would suggest, so I once again pulled a pile of random James Herbert novels off the shelf, and hopefully this will become another two-parter. I may actually, hell, we might make our way through all of the James Herbert novels. I think I might have them all here. Let's start with the top of the pile, and these were not chosen with any kind of thought behind them. The Survivor. The Survivor, as I remember it, is a novel in which our lead character survives a terrible plane crash, and in fact is the only survivor on this 747 crash. I believe this is the third James Herbert novel, and that would put it somewhere like 1976. And the gist of the story is our character makes contact with a medium, some kind of clairvoyant type, who believes that his survival on this plane in this plane crash has unleashed unearthly forces. Essentially, his continued existence has thrown the rest of the world out of whack. It could be that someone wanted him dead. It could be that basically his survival is an anomaly. It goes on, and it isn't, again, a terribly lengthy read, and builds to a flaming crescendo, it's fair to say, that isn't necessarily the ending you might predict. Now, how can you tie that into Curseborne? Well, I think that makes for a fantastic opener. You don't often see plane crashes in RPGs, do you? It's strange, you know. We deal with a lot of RPGs set in confined spaces. I wrote a horror scenario a scenario for Call of Cthulhu set on a Zeppelin. There's, of course, horror on the Orient Express as well. The whole closed room horror angle is a good one. And I know that in the movie Unbreakable, Bruce Willis's character survives a train crash, where I think he is the only survivor, and that has a very similar feeling to what's going on in this much, much earlier novel. So let's assume that one of our player characters is an outcast, or hell, one of the dead, but that would be a different kind of survival. Um, I like the idea of surviving a plane crash and not being able to understand how or why, and then it becomes apparent to you maybe that your outcast nature revealed itself just at the crucial moment, and outcasts are notoriously difficult to kill. The outcast may eventually learn, well, you can be killed if by mortal hands, so surely being involved in a plane crash should have ended you. What if the person who planted the bomb, what if the person who brought the plane down was also an outcast? Someone trying to kill you before your curse manifested. All of a sudden, you've got some decent narrative going through the story, and your character is going to be something of a celebrity. They're going to have cameras in their face. They're going to have people asking them questions. How is it that you survived this plane? How are you living your life now? And you're having to juggle that with the new understanding that you're a battleground angel, for example. Of course, you may end up with the desperate fear that maybe you manifested your damnation for the very first time on the plane and had forgotten about it, selective amnesia, and that's why the plane crashed. So that could be really interesting. So I didn't think I'd actually get something for the survivor, but there we go. Oh, okay, well, here we go then. The Rats. Okay, The Rats. I don't know if this is a first edition. It might be. 1974. Yeah, I think this is a first edition. I mean, there's a little bit of sellotape on the spine because it's seen better days. Look at that. But The Rats is, I guess, the archetypal James Herbert novel. It is his very first novel, where rats the size of dogs start emerging in London and the surrounding area, and when they bite people, they spread a new kind of pathogen that kills them in extreme agony in short order. And the mystery behind where these rats came from, the disease they are carrying, who can do anything about it, the panic that spreads thereafter is actually quite captivating. It's a short, pulpy horror novel. It has a sex scene, it follows the James Herbert trend, of which there is almost always a sex scene in one of these books. Not with rats involved. That comes in the sequel, but we'll get to that. So, where would the rats fit into Curseborne? Now, it's very difficult to have some kind of wilderness, animal attack, environmental hazard in any RPG, because players like to have an antagonist, an adversary in Curseborne terms, that they can interact with, that they can speak with, that they can negotiate with, that they can intimidate. And when they are a bestial, if not demonic, horde of rats, as they kind of are in this, without they don't have the supernatural aspect of being demonic, but they most certainly are more aggressive than the average rat. In fact, they've wiped out the most of the London rats, the classic London rats. And I think that gets brought up in this. There's a surprising lack of rats appearing in London, and some people start to take note, and then they get their faces chewed off. Where would they fit in Curseborne? Well, at the very most basic, you have adversaries like Resurrection Jake, who is a were-rat, or was a were-rat before he was doubly damned. And his being able to mutate and control a swarm of plague-bearing horror rats is a simple enough thing. But I think that isn't giving this enough credit. There's a lot of twists and turns in the novel, where our characters have to deal with various ministries, where they have to protect various people. They're put in corners where they have to make sacrifices. So I would actually go so far as to say that the rats are bleeding over out of a liminality. that this affects the player character's city en masse, in a widespread level. That this isn't going to be an intimate plot. This isn't just going to be a one-off antagonist. Far from it. This is a plague that hits the city. Now, our player accursed are going to have to deal with that in the short term, but being supernatural, they are also the only people involved who can potentially seal off the breach, or can find out the reason that it opened in the first place. Why have these hideous monsters come to be? So I think that makes more of a sense, and I think that's something we'll revisit a few times in the James Herbert canon, because he does a lot of city under attack books from various forces. And I think a lot of the time you're going to be looking for some great supernatural entity behind them. But there are alternatives, as we'll get to. Oh, look, it is the sequel, because I pulled these off in order. We have Lair. Lair is the second of the Rats books. I'm going to have to check now. Is this a first edition as well? Is this this is only his fifth book? Yep, this is a first edition as well. Good lord. So, Lair has a more rural setting. While still having London as its base, it is based primarily out of Epping forests, so you have a more rural environment. The rats have been driven out of the city, and now they have returned and are attacking people in more isolated spots. Therefore, they have developed a level of cunning, a level of intellect that they lacked before. This one, for people who are keeping count, probably has the most... I was about to say the most explicit sex scene so far. It's strange the things you remember, isn't it? I read all of these when I was a teenager, so certain things stuck with me. And as I have said before in my various videos about Stephen King, I still stand by the train scene in it. I still think it's something that teenagers would probably do when faced with the possibility of death. But yes, I was about to say this has the most explicit sex scene, but this does follow the fog. While not necessarily a sex scene, there's definitely... Anyway, that's not what we're here for. We're not actually just here to do a deep dive into the works of James Herbert. How can we differentiate the events of Lair from the events of Rats? Well, I would say the Rats has less of an intelligent agency behind it. Though you could certainly have them be heralds of the Secure returning. The Secure are the diseased were-rat family that have been wiped out largely by the Sphinx family of Primal, or certainly at their behest. Lair, as we now see our rats developing more cunning, I think is going to see an introduction of actual were-rats in various rural environments, isolated environments. You will hear tale of various people coming down with all kinds of horrible diseases. The disease is less of a part in Lair. I think there's been a vaccine by this point, but there's no reason you can't do it. It's can give you more of the outside the city Texas Chainsaw Massacre terror if you end up tracking down someone you've known. Hell, you can start off, you've been invited to a dinner party. It's out in a country house. You and your friends drive out there. By the time you get there, it looks like there's been a home invasion. There's blood everywhere, glasses shattered, and then you find the bodies, and they are half eaten. And then you get the flashbacks. Oh no, the rats are back. And this may sound utterly farcical, but you can make this kind of thing pretty damn grisly and captivating as long as you're rich with the descriptions and you give the players clues to follow. And with this one, yes, you give those rats more agency. You give them... there needs to be a controlling mind behind them. Some of the rats are going to be mutated to the point of sapience, and therefore maybe they have an interactive side. Now then, we're sticking with rats. I'll go to this one very briefly. Domain. The book, I am sure James Herbert wrote immediately after having watched Threads, which is a TV series I recommend everyone watch at least once, though it isn't a particularly enjoyable watch. It is still worth watching. Domain is my favourite James Herbert book. Without shadow of a doubt, it is my favourite James Herbert book. It deals with the aftermath of a nuclear attack on London and probably elsewhere in the United Kingdom, and how several years on from the events of Rats and Lair, while humanity, they're not even piecing themselves back together. Most of the human characters in this story are in a bunker for a good third of it. After they escape London, get underground, they're in a bunker attached to the London Underground, and then that starts to flood, and various things happen. But while all of this is going on the face of it, Domain is just a nuclear apocalypse horror story, which is great on its own, and I would argue may have even been better for just being that. And then the rats realize that their great enemy, the humans, are weak. And so those few rats that remain, they rear up, they rise up, and they start attacking these weakened, panicked humans. Maybe the rats are panicked because many of their domains have been shattered by the nuclear blasts in London. I'm going to say that Domain is a book I hugely recommend to people, even if they don't want to read other James Herbert novels. You don't need to have read Rats or Lair for this one to make any sense, because it is probably his most evocative and rich, and the sub-stories that take place in it. It's interesting. I didn't cover The Stand when we were talking about Stephen King, but the way Stephen King is very, very good at providing side stories. He does a lot of needful things as well. And a lot of his classic novels, you will spend about 6 to 8 pages with a character you may have only seen briefly, and it typically ends horrifically, and then you go back to the main narrative again. Domain does that periodically, so you're not just sticking with the protagonists, you're actually finding out what's going on with these incidental characters, and again, it tends to be pretty awful, like people getting sealed into their own air raid shelter by collapsing masonry and slowly suffocating to death, or thinking they found safety, but it turns out the place they've hidden is now infested with these mutant rats. How to incorporate this into Curseborne? The main thing, rats aside, is a nuked London is a wonderful idea. It is a wonderful liminal space. A wonderfully jaw-dropping, soul-shattering place to visit. This is what the world could look like. Because a lot of the time we look at things like epochs as past events, but I think you can look at battlegrounds and even epochs as the world changed. This is what would have happened if the wrong decision had been made, and then getting trapped there. And the rats can certainly be a part of that, especially if your characters have interacted with them before. But there is so much rich detail in Domain about what would occur in a city like London if it had been exposed to a nuclear attack in multiple places. So yeah, it's a cut again from me because, yes, this is another extra long video that I'm dividing into 2 parts. So please come back next week to find out what other James Herbert novels are being examined. For now, anyway, and there's plenty more to come. But for the time being, I will be seeing you.